Hello and welcome along to 101 Part-Time Jobs podcast with me, Giles Bidder, the only podcast in the world where you get to hear musicians that you're fond of talk about their part-time jobs they've had along their way. If they're not part-time jobs, maybe they're full-time jobs. Maybe it's things that they need to do in order to survive. I'm so excited to welcome Austin Crane of Valley Maker to the show. He's just released his new record, When the Day Leaves. It's a wonderful piece of work. I've been listening to it pretty constantly, and it's been a brilliant record to kind of enter the start of spring with. If you haven't heard it already, I do recommend you go check that out right now or after the show, whatever's good. Thank you for listening to this podcast. We're approaching the 101st episode, and I've got something really exciting, or at least I'm excited about it, to announce on that day. East London's Signature Brew have been brewing music-inspired beers since 2011. They're the official beer of 101 Part-Time Jobs. They've made beers with Mastodon, Idols, Slaves, Sports Team, Craig Finn, The Darkness, and a whole bunch of others. And if you live in the UK, you can go onto their website, signaturebrew.co.uk, make an order directly to your house, and with the voucher code 101 podcast, all capital letters, you can get 10% off that order. All right, this is Austin Crane, Valley Maker, on 101 Part-Time Jobs podcast. Go well. Cheers!
It's taken me too long now. Bell sounds ring out, telling me it's too late.
Austin, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been loving listening to your record, and do you know what? I've been listening to it on my Alexa. Have you got one of them? The bass is good.
Oh, that's cool. Nice. Yeah, I do not. I am pretty low tech in my life in a lot of ways. But I'm trying to be better at that stuff, especially like in a season of the pandemic when shows aren't really happening. It feels like I've been kind of realizing that the degree to which I'm going to have like interaction with people around this release, at least for the months surrounding it, is going to be in the digital sphere mostly. So I'm trying to get better with that stuff, but I haven't quite gotten a home smart speaker yet.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, your new record, When the Day Leaves, it sounds to me like it's coming from a analog kind of place.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's like a real, I have a few different kind of moving parts in my life too, which we could talk about if it's interesting. I've been working on a PhD, which I'm almost done with, and I teach some classes online, geography classes. So I feel like for me, I'm always trying to. I'm not like too busy, but it's just because I have a few different like spheres of life. Music, music is a huge part of like how I spend my days, but like making sure I carve out some kind of pure time to just be like with my instruments and writing and not just on like the computer feels like something that has to be a bit of a discipline for sure.
Speaking about discipline, you're doing my job for me, asking about part-time jobs. Being a geography teacher, that must take up quite a lot of your time.
Yeah, I really like it. I like even I guess well before I had any idea that I could be a working musician or a touring musician or, on a label and kind of continue to put out records, I have been really interested in, like the world and the connections between people and like issues of like migration and international development and things like that. So I've been in grad school for probably too long, a very long time. I studied I studied some of that stuff for my undergrad, and then after working a bit, I did a master's in geography and then carried on into the PhD. And that was when I moved out to Seattle in like 2013 range to kind of begin the PhD process, which I am almost done with. But yeah, that was kind of that was what brought me out to Seattle to go to the University of Washington there. And then I'm always like since I was 13 years old have written songs, and kind of music's been like my favorite thing to do. And I, when I'm like by myself, and especially when I'm with my friends, I've always been in bands and stuff. And it wasn't really until I moved to Seattle that I felt like I had a context for like how to grow a project, and met some people to kind of help with that. But, up until that point, I had really only played shows locally and done a bit of like really DIY regional touring. But once I was in Seattle, I kind of was able to start opening for some touring artists who were coming through, and got connected with a label out there initially for two releases ago, and then in 2018 got hooked up with French Kiss and was able to start just touring a lot more. And so it's been I feel like these all goes to say these two kind of roads or pursuits, or like teaching and academia and research, and on one hand and music on the other, have kind of evolved pretty organically in relation to one another and in relation to where I'm living over the last decade or so.
And being in Seattle, that's obviously got so much history and music. Did you ever find it hard to, was that hard to not get too excited about that? Have you found it okay to be satisfied in both of those realms, the teaching, the academia, but then also playing the music? Because I can just imagine that, you're gonna get really excited about one of them. Being in Seattle, you might be getting too excited about the music and kind of neglecting the academia and the teaching. Has that happened to you?
For sure. Yeah, I think sometimes it is stressful to do both well, and then sometimes I have to be a bit seasonal. And I think, like a season when you're like releasing a record is obviously like pretty intense and there's a lot of things to do, or when you're on tour, there's a lot to do. But then there's times when I'm home and, like I feel like a good chunk of, if I think on average of the last 5 years, when I've not been on the road, it's really nice to have some balance and to be able to kind of, I don't know, they use pretty different parts of the brain, I think. I mean, there are some overlaps which we could talk about, but I think that like in a lot of ways, it's been really generative and kind of mutually beneficial to be able to do some more kind of analytical work, or, teaching is very much like its own process that I love, and very kind of interactive, discussion based with other people and kind of sharing ideas and stuff. So those are two kind of terrains. And, writing a article for academic publication, for example, is very analytical. Whereas like on the other hand, when I like pick up the guitar and go into the headspace of songwriting, I feel like that's a space for me, like not to try to like put a pin on things, not to try to like arrive at a conclusion or like a clear understanding necessarily. It's a space to kind of enter the mystery of being alive and kind of encounter some of those big questions that I feel like I'm often sitting with, and many of us are often sitting with, about what it means to be alive and what's happening around us and to be in relation with other people. I think songwriting is a space that I think for me, allows me to engage that stuff. And then, then you put the record out and go on tour, and then it also can be very relational too, which I love. I feel like I'm missing that so much right now. Just I don't think I realized until the pandemic hit and we got well into it, how much of my community and like social interaction and connection with other people was centered around the ongoing reality of music in my life, and all the beautiful people around the world, including in the UK, that have come into my life through that, so that's a few things that come to mind about that dynamic between the two.
I think we're going to need some practice when gigs start happening again and parties happen, because we haven't been that good at socializing. I think we might be quite bad getting back into it.
Man, I realized recently I've turned into such a weirdo, because I'm home all the time. I never leave my house right now. I take my dogs on a walk or something, but other than that, I'm just here. And I met with someone at the University of South Carolina, where in the city that I live in, and they're actually back on campus. The students are back, and I went on campus like with my mask and hand sanitizer, and just felt like I could tell how much my mental psyche had changed just being in a space with a lot of other people walking around. And it's just I think you're right. Yeah, it's hard. It's a little bit hard to imagine being in a packed room of people at a concert, even though that's like the only thing I want a lot of the time. Like I miss that so bad, but it's also like gonna feel weird.
Yeah, totally. That, what you said about being seasonal, that makes so much sense to me. And it just makes me think that we're not really taught that we can be seasonal in our vocations. Do you know what I mean? It's not really something that a lot of jobs can offer you. You know, the fact that you can go on tour 6 months in the year and then do that job the other 6 months. And on a deeper level, maybe it's a bit of a kind of Bowieism. It's like, you know, we got so many different sides to us. Do you know what I mean? We're not just a goofy person or a happy person or a sad person. You know what I mean? There's loads of different ways to be, and that's something that the outside world sometimes doesn't let you know can be possible.
Yeah, I love what you said and totally agree with it, that we all are, you know, an amalgam of different things. And, you know, it's especially as we age and get older, and, you know, I like, especially for me, having moved to this place where I grew up, or close to where I grew up, it's about an hour away from there. You know, like, I think this move from Seattle back to South Carolina definitely brought up a lot of those questions, you know, especially nearing the end of the PhD. And it's basically as soon as we moved here, the pandemic set in too. So I would not say that I have that balance figured out for sure. It's a very open-ended question for me. Like, the world feels like unbelievably uncertain right now, and the future feels like that. But that being said, I really do I deeply affirm and believe what you said about, like, us having multiple parts of who we are, and yeah, it being a, like, healthy and beneficial way to live, to try to, like, keep those active and mutually reinforcing, even kind of those different, if we can kind of be honest about that fact that I'm not just one thing, or I don't do just one thing with my life. Like, you know, at the level of personal identity, you know, just to take it easy on ourselves, even like the need to feel productive and accomplished and everything. It's like so some days I struggle with that for sure, but it also is like cool. And I think the reality of, like, teaching regularly, that's very cyclical, you know, semester to semester. And then music, with the seasonality and cyclicality of different records and different tours, I feel like it's a chance to continually try to build something, you know, and you're always doing that with other people too, which is going to change it every time, you know, the people who are involved on a record, or the students in a class, or, you know, the people who are coming to the shows. So there's a kind of humanity and interaction, and kind of, yeah, like, the chance to collectively build something in these two different worlds that I'm in, that I always really feed off of and enjoy a lot too. And it's cool to I'm realizing, excuse me, I'm realizing with this record coming out, how much, like, happier I've been the last few weeks, just to be able to, like, have a project, you know, and something that I'm kind of, like, building and getting to have conversations like this around. I always feel like that at the beginning of, like, a semester with teaching too. It's just really kind of fun to meet the students and start that process and everything. So yeah, that's part of it too. I think the kind of continually, yeah, having projects that you're building with other people. I dig that a lot.
In the context of, you know, the music industry, and I'm specifically thinking about press releases, it's kind of a press officer's job to sum you up, to define you as one or two things to journalists, you know, trying to sum you up, trying to shape you, to put you into, make you something that's easily disseminated, easily written about, which completely makes sense. But I'm just thinking, you know, but your first album came out in 2010, yep, self-titled. And I suppose, you know, since 2010, that's given you 11 years to think about how you want to be represented, how you want to be defined or summed up in that way that makes you easily digestible as a musician.
Yep, for sure. And I always, every time we work on a bio for a record, which I've done a few times now, it's always you know, a bit of a long-winded conversation that then gets whittled down just to try to create a bit of a narrative, or an identity around the release. But I think honestly with this new record, that was a little bit easier, because this move from Seattle to South Carolina is a pretty foundational or fundamental dimension of this record, and even how it was made and the headspace I was in around kind of writing it and recording it. So I feel like that kind of was in terms of, like, telling the story of the record and the season of life that surrounded it, and getting that kind of biography together, that to me felt like a pretty immediate space to be in, you know?
saying it again, it's over a decade that you've been able to reflect on what you are, who you are, how you
Yeah.
want to be represented to the world. Is there a fearlessness that you can develop over that time?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I'm always like, I feel like being honest with my art and music and how the ways in which that exists in the world has always been something that's felt pretty important to me. But then, like, especially in my early mid 20s when I was kind of starting grad school, I definitely think for a while I was like, is it okay that I am like playing music or like share, like, I don't know, like can I tell people that I do this, or I don't know. I think for definitely part of me growing up as a person and figuring out who I am in the world is just trying to be pretty honest and transparent about, like, not like I have the answers for how to strike a balance between like life and academia and music, but at least that being something that I am like pretty committed, because I really love both things, out of a place of sincerity. Like, it's something that I honestly want to kind of try to figure out as time goes along. And like money and finances is one part of that, but I think it also, like, we only have so much time on earth and only so many days that we're healthy, like, not to be heavy, but I feel like I part of getting a little bit older too is just trying to be like really present to the time that I have and how I use that, and yeah, creating space for the things that I love. And I don't think it makes sense to in line with what you said earlier, that we're all like a mixture of different things and have different seasons to our lives and parts of who we are. I don't think it, as I've gotten older, it hasn't made much sense to try to artificially enforce like boundaries between those things, or not be honest with people about kind of who I am or where I want my life to go in these ways. And it's been really meaningful, I think, on the academic side. Like, if I think about my PhD advisor, who is like the best person in the world, I really just appreciate her so much. And the folks at French Kiss, or like the booking agents that I work with for concerts and stuff, I feel like being able to just be honest about what I want from life and how I see all this stuff kind of coming, like, or how I want to have like a future that's open to different possibilities for balancing these things. I think that's been something that actually, maybe because it leads partly to generative conversations like this and has like a bit of narrative around the music as well. But I think it's been something that people have been, like, to me, surprisingly open to and accepting of, and kind of even like, I don't know. Yeah. Encouraging. They've encouraged it. So yeah.
Great to hear. Have there been times in your career where you've thought, oh, this doesn't feel like me? You've gone down a route and maybe it seemed right at the time, but you started it and it wasn't feeling like you. Has that happened where you've had to sort of do a 180 on yourself?
I don't. Do you mean that in terms of like the industry or like specific projects, or?
Yeah, people you're working with, but mainly yourself. Have you found yourself kind of run away with what you're doing? I mean, we all have the ability to kind of let our egos get the best of us sometimes, to think something's a good idea when it might not be.
Sure. I feel like if I think about the music side of my life, I and it's probably partly because of, like I mentioned a little while earlier, the part of the country that I grew up in and the kind of context that I lived in. Like, I didn't know anyone who was like a working artist. That wasn't on my radar as like something that that like you could be quote unquote when you grow up.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's I honestly and I'm just so aware too that, like, to whatever degree to which I'm able to do music for my job, that depends on people coming to my shows, people buying the merchandise that I have, people like listening to the music online, people like yourself wanting to have conversations like this, So I've always tried to kind of maintain I don't know, I guess like a humility around that, or like a perspective around that, to just be like, I don't deserve a career in in music. I'm going to work hard for one, and I'm going to do the best work that I can. But if I get to have that, or for the years in which I get to be be like a working musician or devote time and energy to that. Which is the way I like to think about it more than money. It's like, like the time that I can devote to music will be largely based on people like believing in what I'm doing and like, and supporting it. And, I don't know, for me mentally, I think that helps me stay in a like place of kind of gratitude and acceptance a lot more than like wishing things were better than they are, or like not being satisfied or something. Because I don't know, it's this is not my phrase. I've heard a lot of people say it over time, that like music is not a competition. Like I really believe that, and I think that music is music is also not like a job that I feel like I deserve. It's one that I love, and one that I feel so like truly like grateful that I've been able to do in the last few years. But it's something that I try to keep perspective on. And yeah, just if I'm tempted to get into a bad headspace about it, just remember, like, I don't know, like last summer I got to tour Europe for like 5 weeks with Steve Gunn, who's an artist that I've loved for a long time. And I just think about certain moments that have like happened, or like good shows, or it's like I've already had like, or like a label like French Kiss that I've known since I was like a teenager is like putting out my music now. Or like I'm on a booking agency with a lot of artists that I have like that I listened to way before I like even moved to Seattle or whatever. So I don't know, I just try to kind of think about like the journey of my life up to this point, and be like grateful for things that have happened. And that's not to say I don't want like my project to grow more, or like that I don't like have hopes for the future and things that I want to work towards. I certainly do, but I try to just for myself, like mentally try to kind of keep that all in perspective, and in that way,
Absolutely. I love doing this podcast, and I also produce at Soho Radio, which is an internet radio station. And, I think sometimes you'll have those down days where you think, oh, I love what I do, but I wish I didn't have to freak out so much about, it not being full time, or not being able to make like a proper wad from it. Do you know what I mean? And I think that it's easy to get down on yourself. Sometimes it's hard to pick yourself up from those days.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely struggle with those thoughts from time to time. And I think especially in the past year, we moved back to South Carolina from Seattle about a year ago for my wife's job. She delivers babies. She works in a in a hospital, and she's a midwife. Yeah, which is amazing. And I have so much awe and admiration, and like respect for the work that she does. And when she got this job offer in South Carolina, like I guess a year and a half ago, I remember like the moment in Seattle where it was just like, well, we're obviously like moving, because that's where like, our family's in that area. We have a ton of community. It's a lot more affordable than Seattle. And it just, but the reality of that move was like, so what does that mean? What does that mean for kind of my vacation? And it felt like us being in a more affordable area meant that I would be able to like kind of rest in the fact that I'm like doing music, and there's not as much like pressure around that, like when you live in a city like Seattle. But and then the pandemic hit like kind of right when we moved here, and I had a lot of tour dates. Like I don't know how many, like upwards of 50 to 75 tour dates get kind of canceled and are perpetually moved back now into the outer reaches of this year. So it's definitely been, that those conversations are always or those thoughts are they don't go away. There's a lot of pressure to sort of, particularly around aging. Like I'm in my early 30s now, and it's sort of like a time definitely where like your friends start having kids and getting like promoted in their jobs and all that stuff, and you're like, well, I was gonna tour this year, but no, I can't.
Fuck.
It's a mental trip a little bit, for sure.
Yeah. I guess one of the best ways you can describe Valley Maker is that, you're a folk artist, and being a folk artist, that's the definition of a working musician, right?
Definitely. Yeah. You don't like have the sense that you're ever going to be like playing stadiums or something. It's like, and honestly, I love that about it. Like I love playing small venues and the immediacy of that, and the kind of, yeah, like the humanity of it, like the kind of ability to, I always like whenever I can, whenever it's practical, I like to be at the merch table, like at my shows. And I don't know, I probably because when I'm not touring, I'm just like home a lot with my writing my dissertation and teaching online and stuff. So I feel like getting to tour is yeah, it definitely, I love the aspect of it. Feels like a job that I love, you know.
And you tour alone, do you? I mean, talking about the financial aspect of it, anyone can see how when you're touring alone, you and an acoustic guitar, maybe you can take public transport, and you know the take home from it will be bigger, you know, frankly.
Definitely. Yeah. The like Valley Maker as a project for me is kind of at this point, after it's been in existence for 10 years or so, even though I've only been touring maybe half that time, I kind of see it as like a, first and foremost, I guess, an avenue for my songs, but then beyond that, like a pretty large tent of collaborators who live kind of all over the country at this point. So touring, I every tour is a little bit different, and I actually love that. Part of that is certainly practical considerations, like, yeah, what are the budgets for the shows? Because it's important to me to like be able to pay people and at least something for their time. And you know, like, so if the, if the show budgets are small, like not taking 5 or 7 people out, you know, is like a wise thing to do. But you know, also like regional considerations. I especially living out in Seattle, I wonder if this will change now that I'm on the East Coast. But you know, Seattle is quite peripheral in terms of where it's at in the geography of the United States. So like to go on tour from there, if you're not going to get on a plane and fly somewhere, is like a bit of a commitment, you know, you kind of set out. So I feel like historically I've had like some people on the West Coast that I've toured with for shows in that region. And then a few folks like based out of the Southeast and on the East Coast for shows like on this side of the country. And then Europe has tended to be solo more than with a band, just because the cost of getting over there and stuff. But and it's nice to be able to do it solo too, just for supporting tours as well. I think like just, you know, because support budgets are always pretty low, understandably, and that's a nice way to be able to do that as well.
How do you reconcile between playing alone and playing with a band? Because they're going to be two different types of performances, right? Do you see that as an opportunity to show different sides of you?
I do. Yeah. I think, you know, solo for me definitely takes more focus, or like I feel like I have to be really present to the song itself and the performance. And obviously that's something I always want to do, but I feel like when it's solo, you feel a little bit exposed in that way, you know. But part of that for me has over the years has been an evolution of like even the guitars that I play, and like what I do. Like I've started like solo, I always like to play, whether it's an acoustic or electric guitar, I like to have an amp up on stage that creates a bit of, you know, some reverb that creates a bit of like an atmosphere around, just because that feels a little bit less stark to me, you know. But honestly, and then like playing with a band does feel like something, especially, you know, some of my songs are more like groove oriented than others. Like, so if it's a solo show, I'll lean a little bit more on the finger picking kind of songs. Whereas if it's a band show, I'll change the set list a little bit more towards that. But, you know, also for the songs that I would play the same way, for the songs that would be in both sets, solo or band, I feel like it's honestly so fun to like inhabit the songs that I write differently. Does that make sense? Like
Definitely.
To have a song that feels like one way solo and then like very different with a band. Like maybe we do an extended intro, or like speed it up or slow it down, or like, you know, make it groove a little harder. I don't know. Like it's really cool. And in general, I like to see songs as kind of like living artifacts that like are very dynamic in terms of what they mean, and that can change over time and evolve between different people. Or even for me, the meaning of a song can change over time. But I also love that, like, you know, like songs are also things that like in the context of a tour that I write, you know, in my house, and then bring out on the road and share with 4 or 5 other people. and that feels like very different and like an evolution of that of the song as an artifact, and something that can kind of like blossom a little bit differently every night. And that's one of the things about touring that I honestly love. And it's also like it depends on the room you're in, and so that's there's a yeah, dynamism is probably the best word, or kind of different possibilities for how the song can feel that I feel kind of addicted to. That's like one of my favorite things about touring.
It's nice to hear that you don't feel pressured about making any hard and fast decisions. Like, you don't always have to be a solo artist. You don't always, have to be a band. That freedom must be enjoyable.
Yeah, I kind of like, I do not feel like that. I like the ability to do tours differently. And one way that I have toured before, and I hope I get to do more of as well, is with my friend Amy Godwin, who sings on the record, and she's actually sang on all of the records that I've done as Valley Maker.
Her voice is amazing on some of those songs on the new record.
Thank you. Or I guess I should say I'll pass that along, but I agree with you. she's great. And it's probably my closest collaborator over time. We've been really good friends for since we were in college, 10, 12 years ago, and have she lives in Portland, Oregon now, and is a choir teacher. So we don't get to tour very often together, but every once in a while she and I will do duo shows with just a guitar and two vocals. And that's another way of playing and touring that I really, really love, and hope can happen again soon.
I guess something that you're always naturally going to be, pressured to look towards is the future, and how you see what you're doing in the long term.
Sure.
We've touched on it already a few times in this chat, between education and teaching, and then playing as Valley Maker and across other musical projects. How do you see those things continuing? Can you imagine there's going to be an impasse, or one of them's going to take over the other?
Yeah, it's that. I wish I had.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry.
I wish I had a better answer to that. That feels like the $1 million question of my life right now. But yeah, I hope I can tell you what I hope for. I guess that I can strike a balance between kind of being able to be an educator in a sustainable So I'm going to finish my PhD. That's the first thing, and I'm working on my dissertation every day, even this morning and after this interview. I've kind of got it up on my computer and have been plugging away. So that's the goal first and foremost, which I'm hoping to do by middle of this year. And then, if shows are back online, which, hopefully they will be by late summer or fall, I'll gladly kind of step into that for a while. And then, to play some shows on this new album. And then beyond that, I guess I could just say what I'd hope for, which is to be able to kind of be based in a school or college or university, where I'm able to do some teaching, but also whether it's in summer breaks or semester by semester, kind of make the decision to carve out some space for shows, how those can happen. As much as I love playing shows, I'm also not super inclined to be the person that's on the road 200 to 300 days a year. I keeping tours in the 2 to 4 week zone and then being home for a while. So which you can cover a pretty good bit of ground in that amount of time. And so I definitely think it's possible, and plenty of people have done it, where to sort of be have a life and vocation as an educator, and then play several months of shows in any given year, kind of around the flow of that. So that's what I'm always working towards and imagining for the future. And yeah, so we'll see. And then if music got to a point at which that could be just full time, and I could be a bit more, who knows? We'll see. We'll see what the years ahead hold. But yeah, I'm committed to trying to see what's possible.
What are you doing your PhD on? What's the title of your dissertation? The
title of the dissertation is I could look it up here. I forget. It's changed a few times, but essentially it's around the politics of humanitarianism and how the kind of conflicts that are involved in the spaces of humanitarianism around migration. in the European Union. I did a lot of kind of qualitative interviews and observation with different humanitarian organizations, like in London and different kind of major cities like Berlin, Hamburg, Brussels, different cities around Europe that have a lot of migrants living there, particularly recently arrived asylum seekers. And these organizations kind of help those migrants like navigate the process of seeking asylum and then figure out what to do if they receive a negative decision, like if they're not allowed to stay, which is a really kind of difficult, like very difficult space for the migrants to be in because they're already in Europe, but are having to navigate, the decision to try to stay and like appeal the asylum decision, or move to another country, or like go back home, or like, and so that's a space in which like humanitarian organizations are trying to give advice and provide resources and outlets. But it's also we live in a time in the US and the UK and in much of Europe where governments, at least parts of our governments, are seeing migration as a threat and as a security issue. Or there's definitely political pressure that governments feel around that from perhaps I might say racist, but like right wing kind of movements in society. That
it's arbitrary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But it creates these really difficult situations for migrants who are living in pretty extreme limbo. And I guess the motivation for my PhD was to try to understand how humanitarian organizations, in particular humanitarian actors, navigate that pretty conflicted space, like wanting to help migrants, but also having a pretty limited range in which they can help them, just because of how security focused our governments are at this point around that issue. It's the lottery of life to some degree. I mean, sorry, I feel like I'm going into geography teacher mode right now, but it's
well, I feel like I'm learning.
Migration is a undeniable reality of our world today. Like, people are moving and migrating for many reasons. I just migrated across thousands of miles, internally back, within the United States, but I also, frequently cross borders, for example, like on any given European tour, I might, cross borders 10 or 15 or 20 times. And, I'm a privileged citizen that I get to do that. I have a passport that allows me to do that. And, it's hardly something that I would even be like conscious of if I hadn't been like studying this stuff, but it's
not something that we earned, that, is it?
No. Yeah, it's not. And I think it's so important to, and this is one of the reasons I love teaching geography classes or teaching around issues of migration, because it creates a space in which we can kind of think deeply about who migrants are and why people leave their home, the different reasons for that. Like, like why people, for example, in the country that I live in, the United States, like why are caravans of migrants coming through Latin America and Central America, and why might people like be leaving certain areas of Mexico to come to the United States? Like even why are places in the United States, like, how do we benefit from the labor of people who are undocumented in this country? There's a lot of things around it that I think in the political discourse that's just around quote unquote, whether they're legal or illegal, which I try not to use those terms, but that's a sort of gross simplification of an extremely human and extremely difficult and embodied process of migration that I think it's like, we're all human beings, and we're all like, many of us are motivated by a desire to be with family, or to provide for the people that we love, or to continue to to better our lives. And like just by the nature of where we were born, there's a really pretty massive geography of inequality around that in the world. So that's really what kind of motivated me to like start doing my PhD, actually, like kind of just being bothered by that reality and wanting to understand it more deeply. And it's been quite interesting. I'm thinking of a particular moment when I was going through the Amsterdam airport with my guitar cases in hand and like stressed out about getting to my flight on time. And I actually like walked by the area of the airport that I had talked to people about in my interviews, that like people who are returning, migrants who are returning from Europe, like get sent to. And it was a real moment for me of like, wow, I'm so like privileged. You know, I get to like travel around with my guitars and play music. And like, this is the area that people are like, who've given like everything to come to Europe, or like having to go back home, you know?
That's so strange. I had exactly the same experience in Amsterdam. I missed a flight once coming home, and then on the way out again, I saw the queue of people being detained, and it was horrible. It was an awful sight.
Yeah, definitely. It's you know, it's kind of wild that we live in a world that is, you know, borderless for a lot of people. And, you know, like globalization, I guess, would be the technical term for that. We live in a globalized world, but for many people, borders like matter immensely and are, you know, huge factors in their lives. And yeah, that's kind of, you know, and I think even on my new record, there are some moments where I'm kind of reckoning with that stuff. Hopefully not in like, I don't know, just it's one of the things I think about a lot in terms of like what it means for me to be alive in this moment, and for us as human beings to be living in relation to one another. So yeah, I think that would be an issue that probably like bleeds in certain ways into, well, certainly my academic life, but kind of bleeds into the sphere of music too, and the writing, even beyond that instance in the airport that I just referenced, where it was extremely apparent.
Do you think this is a subject that comes down to the way that well, first of all, education, and then as a big part of that, the general communication, or whether it's discussed in a language that someone such as myself would understand, someone who's not a civil servant or a government official or has been trained specifically in that? Do you think that is what one of the solutions to a better world, being able to talk about migration in a way that we can all understand?
Yes, I think so. I here's what I would say to that. I don't think I have like, I don't see myself as being like particularly wise or having like answers for the world on this topic, but I do believe that like there are a lot of dimensions of let's just take migration. Like there are a lot of dimensions of migration that are rarely considered in our societies and like political discourses, but I think are really important, because if they were considered, like the humanity of migrants and the humanity of the migration journey, and like, you know, why people migrate and what they experience when they migrate, like those kinds of things, I'm hopeful. At least these are somewhat dark political times to be saying this in, especially after the, you know, attack on the Capitol building a few weeks ago in the United States. And, you know, we're in a fairly heavy time right now where a lot of people are angry. But I'm hopeful that education at a fairly broad level can foster empathy. You know, like if we gain an understanding of where other people are coming from, that our hearts will be a little softer and a little more open and a little more inclusive, you know, around an issue like migration, for example, and the way we talk about that and the policies that we desire for our country around that. You know, I hope that like better understanding of like the humanity of that could create more empathy for people, and hopefully like change our society. That's why I want to teach about it and why I believe it's important to. Yeah.
Well, we got pretty deep. Thanks for you know, being up for answering my questions. I think sometimes that's the scary thing about these big topics, though. I think it is, you feel a bit vulnerable when you ask these questions.
Oh no, it's fine. I'm glad. It's cool. It's actually this has been fun to think about how these two worlds of my life intersect. It's been really valuable for me too. Thanks for the great questions.
Well, look at us. Your album When the Day Leaves has just come out. It's a masterful body of work. My favorite song on it is No One Is Missing. I think it just sounds amazing. The noise floor on it is incredible. What's your favorite song from the record?
That's a great question. I could way overanalyze this, so I'm just going to tell you the first one that came to mind. I think it would be Mockingbird, which I actually released as a standalone single in the fall. So it's out there on the streaming services and whatnot now, but it'll be it is a part of the record as well. Yeah, I think and I'm inclined to say it's my favorite one because it's, if I pick up the guitar, when I pick up my guitar at the house, it's kind of the one that I most often start playing and want to play for myself and feel a lot of resonance with when I play. But it also, it was the song I wrote like maybe 3 or 4 days after we arrived to South Carolina. Most of the record I wrote before we moved here, in the kind of months and year leading up to that move in Seattle. But there were a couple songs, including Mockingbird, that I wrote once we'd arrived here before recording began. And I think that song is very much a sort of a time capsule or a timestamp maybe of like how I was feeling in that moment. And many of the questions, it's a long song. It's like almost 6 minutes, I think, and has quite a few verses that think about or that engage with different dimensions of my past and questions about the future, and the tensions inherent in moving across the country and leaving people behind, but also joining a new community. A lot of those kind of big questions and issues that were swirling around at that moment of having just arrived here. That song, when I listen to it now or when I play it now, it feels very true and I guess real to where I was at in that moment. So I think that would probably be my favorite one for that reason.
That's the way to answer a question about your new record.
Nice, man.
Thank you so much for the chat, Austin.
Yeah, thank you.
Austin Crane of Valley Maker, When the Day Leaves, is out now. If you're into any kind of folk music of all sorts, I'm pretty sure you're going to love it. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy this podcast, please go ahead and rate and review it and tell your friends it exists. Thank you, Austin, for coming on. Thank you, Amy at Prescription, for sorting this out. And go well. Have a lovely afternoon. Have a lovely rest of your week. See you next week. Cheers.
I've been working all day for me mate on the side, running around like a blue-ass fly. I've been working all day for me mate. Every fleeting minute I've been on the go, up and down the ladder like a fiddler's elbow. I've been working all day for me mate.
This is a Mighty Moon Media podcast.